It was a Wednesday morning in November, and I was trying to get the storm door open. That sounds ordinary, and it was, right up until it wasn't. I'd been meaning to ask my son to look at that door since October. The hinge had been stiff all autumn, and every morning I had to put my shoulder into it to get out for my walk. That Wednesday, I put my shoulder into it harder than usual. The door gave way all at once, and my left foot caught on the threshold mat. I went down fast. No warning, no catching myself. Just the cold concrete of the front step coming up to meet me, and then a sound I'll never unhear. A flat, dense crack from somewhere inside my left wrist, followed immediately by my hip connecting with the step edge. I lay there in the open doorway, half in and half out of the house, with the November air coming in cold across my face. The sky above me was that flat gray that southern Ontario gets in late fall, the kind that promises nothing. I tried to push myself up with both hands. My left wrist screamed. I tried to roll onto my right side. My hip wouldn't cooperate. I managed to get my right arm across to my coat pocket, which was, thank God, where my phone was. I called 911. My voice came out smaller than I expected. The paramedic who came through the door first was young enough to be my grandson. He kept calling me ma'am in a way that was somehow both very professional and very alarming. In the ambulance, he asked who to call. My son, I said. He's my emergency contact. He tried. Got voicemail. At the hospital, they tried again and again. The nurse at admissions left 2 messages. The orthopedic coordinator left 1 more before I went into surgery for the hip. A hairline fracture in the femoral neck, they said. Bad enough to need a pin, not bad enough to need a full replacement. They told me with the specific cheerfulness of people delivering relative good news, very lucky. I went under anesthesia, still not knowing if my son knew I was there. When I came out of surgery, the room was dim and smelled like antiseptic, and the particular dry warmth of hospital heating. Everything felt thick and slow. I turned my head toward the chair beside the bed, the way you do when you're expecting someone. The chair was not empty, but it wasn't my son in it. It was Fern Kowalski, who'd been my next-door neighbor for 6 years before I sold the house in Burlington and moved to the smaller place in Oakville. Fern, who I hadn't seen in person since the Canada Day long weekend 3 years ago. Fern, who is 62 years old and had driven 40 minutes in November traffic and was now asleep upright in a hospital chair with her winter coat still on and her reading glasses pushed up on her head. Fern. My voice came out like something scraped off pavement. Her eyes opened immediately. People who are actually sleeping take a moment to orient themselves. Fern was on her feet in one motion, which told me she hadn't been sleeping at all. Oh, thank God. She reached for my hand. You're back? How did you? Your neighbor, the man across the street, the older one with the retriever, Mr. Arsenault. He saw the ambulance, found your spare key in the lockbox to check the house, found my number on the list you keep by the phone. He called me. She squeezed my hand. I got here about 2 hours after your surgery. You've been out for almost 7 hours. My son, has anyone? The hospital has been trying him. Something moved across Fern's face, a careful neutrality that people use when they're managing information. His phone must be going to voicemail. She said it gently. She was giving him a reason. I didn't say anything. I looked at the ceiling for a while. Then Fern cleared her throat quietly and said, "There's something I think you should see, but we can wait until you're... Show me now." She hesitated. Then she picked up her phone from the chair beside her, navigated to something, and held it up. My daughter-in-law's Instagram. Public, because she'd always kept it public, which she called building her personal brand. At the top of the feed, posted 4 hours ago, a photograph of Whistler, British Columbia. My son and his wife in ski gear at the top of a run, mountains behind them, golden afternoon light. They were laughing. Both of them properly laughing, the way people laugh when things are genuinely good. The caption read, "Unplugged and on the mountain. No emails, no calls, no obligations. Just the 2 of us and the best powder we've seen in years." I read it twice. Scroll down, I said. She did. There were more. The 2 of them at a resort restaurant the night before, wine glasses raised. My daughter-in-law at a spa with the caption, "Self-care isn't selfish, it's survival." My son at the bottom of a run, polls raised in triumph. Each one time-stamped across the 2 days I'd been in surgery and recovery. They had cell service. Instagram doesn't post itself. No obligations. I handed the phone back to Fern. Outside the hospital window, it was fully dark. I'd gone in that morning, and now it was night, and my son was on a mountain in British Columbia, and the person sitting beside my bed was a woman who'd driven 40 minutes in traffic because a retired man with a dog had found her number on a list by my kitchen phone. "I'm sorry, Bev," Fern said. Her using my name like that, just my name, quietly, without any of the noise people usually pack around difficult things, was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in a long time. Fern stayed for 4 days. She slept in the chair the first night and complained about it not at all. She brought food from the Lebanese place on Lakeshore because hospital food in Ontario is, she said, a human rights issue, and she was not wrong. She sat with me through the physio assessments and the insurance paperwork and the conversation with the discharge planner about what modified mobility meant for my daily life going forward. She did not try to manage my emotions or tell me how I should feel. She was just there, in the solid, undemonstrative way of people who grew up in Northern Ontario and learned early that presence matters more than words. I'd met Fern when she moved in next door 12 years ago, 3 weeks after my husband Gordon passed. She'd shown up at my door with a casserole, pierogies and kielbasa, her grandmother's recipe, and the extremely practical information that she had a reciprocal snow-clearing arrangement with the previous neighbor and wanted to know if I wanted to continue it. I did. We ended up at her kitchen table for 3 hours that first night, talking about nothing important and everything that was. She knew Gordon only through photographs and my stories, but she mourned him with me as genuinely as if she'd known him herself. She had known my son since he was in his early 30s. She'd seen the gradual change, though she'd never said so directly. She was too precise for speculation and too kind for cruelty. Lying there in the hospital, I thought about the shape of the past 4 years. Gordon died in the autumn 4 years ago. Massive cardiac event, no warning, no chance to prepare. My son flew in from Vancouver. They'd moved there 3 years earlier for his wife's career, and was here for the funeral and 4 days afterward. My daughter-in-law had a presentation she couldn't postpone. She came for the service and left the next morning. I handled the estate alone. The probate filing, the pension paperwork, the account closures, the insurance claims. Gordon had been meticulous with his records, which made it more manageable than it might have been. But still, 41 years of a shared life reduced to forms and signatures, and I sat at that dining room table alone every evening going through another folder, another file, another decision. I called my son when I found Gordon's military service medal in a shoebox in the basement. I was crying so hard I could barely talk. He listened for 4 minutes and then said he had a call he had to take, but we'd talk more that weekend. We didn't talk that weekend. I called him Sunday evening. He apologized. He'd been busy. The visits shortened. The first Christmas I was alone. He came for 3 days, and it was fine. Not warm, exactly, but present. The second Christmas, a day and a half. They had plans with her family in Kelowna. Last Christmas was a video call on the 26th, 22 minutes. My grandson Callum, he was 8, serious-faced, already showing the focused quality of his father at that age, waved at me from the background and was then ushered off to something else. Callum's school concert in the spring. I'd asked months in advance if I could come. "We'll see, Grandma," my daughter-in-law had said, which I'd learned was her version of no. I watched a 30-second clip she posted on Instagram instead. Then there was the phone call in August, 7 months before my fall. My son, calling on a Saturday, which he almost never did, his voice carrying the particular brightness of someone who wants something. "Mom, I've been thinking. That house must be getting to be a lot for you to manage on your own. Property taxes, maintenance, the garden. It's a big place for one person." "It's a townhouse," I said. "It's not large." "Still, the Oakville market is incredible right now. You could sell, pocket significant equity, move somewhere more manageable. Have you looked at any of those newer senior communities? Some of them are really lovely, independent living, but with support when you need it. I was 67 years old. I was volunteering 3 mornings a week at the food bank, taking a watercolor class on Thursdays and walking 5 kilometers every morning. "I'll think about it," I said, which was the politest way I had of ending that conversation. I thought about it. What I thought was that call wasn't about me. Fern was at the hospital when 2 things happened that connected the August phone call to everything else. On the 3rd day, my friend Sylvie came to visit. Sylvie Marchand, who I'd known since our children were in elementary school together. She's 71, retired French teacher, sharper than most people, 20 years younger. She brought flowers and a tin of her shortbread and sat down and caught me up on the food bank gossip and the watercolor class and the general news of the neighborhood. And then, like a tap turning off, she went quiet. "I need to tell you something that I've been sitting with," she said. "Your daughter-in-law called me in September." "Called you?" "Out of nowhere. Very warm, very chatty at first. She'd always been friendly enough. But then the questions started." Sylvie set down her tea. "Whether I'd noticed you seeming confused lately, whether you'd mentioned forgetting things, whether I thought you were managing well on your own." The room got a degree colder. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you'd corrected my math at the food bank last month and that you were crisper than I was on my best day." Sylvie's jaw was set the way it gets when she's decided something. She seemed unsatisfied with that. She asked if you'd had any recent falls. "I hadn't." I told her that. She asked me to let her know if anything changed. Sylvie paused. "Something did change, but she's not the person I'm calling." An hour after Sylvie left, another visitor, my neighbor from 2 doors down, a man named George who'd shoveled my walk twice since I moved to Oakville and brought me tomatoes from his garden every August. George was 69, a retired Windsor auto worker, not prone to drama or embellishment. He stood at the foot of my hospital bed, holding his cap in both hands. "I'm not one to get involved in family business," he started. "George, my wife got a call 3-4 weeks back from your son's wife." He looked at the cap. "Same questions. Was your wife noticing anything concerning about Beverly? Was she seeming forgetful? Confused? Was she managing well on her own?" My hands were very still on the blanket. 2 calls. 2 people. Same questions. Weeks apart. That wasn't a daughter-in-law checking in. That was someone building a record. Fern was the one who found the package. She'd gone to my place to pick up some things, and she'd brought in the mail while she was there. Among it, an envelope from a place called Sunrise Meadows Retirement and Memory Care, located in Burlington. Inside, a glossy brochure and something worse, a partially completed intake form. Resident name, Beverly Thornton. Age, 67. Emergency contact listed as my son. The checkboxes for cognitive concerns, history of falls, unable to manage independently, and family-initiated assessment were all checked. The financial disclosure section, insurance policy information, home ownership details, estimated property value, had been partially filled in. At the bottom, in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, her name, her cell number, her email. The postmark was dated 3 weeks before I fell. I sat with that form for a long time. The August call about my property value. The September calls to Sylvie and George asking leading questions about my mental capacity. The form arriving in October with boxes checked describing a woman I didn't recognize as myself. And then, in November, I fell, and they were on a mountain with their phones in their pockets, posting about powder snow and freedom from obligation, because a woman in a hospital bed with a fractured hip wasn't an emergency. She was a timeline accelerating. I picked up my phone and called my solicitor. Her name is Maureen Thibodeau, who'd handled Gordon's estate and knew mine inside out. She'd been practicing estate law in Oakville for 30 years. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has seen you at your most paperwork vulnerable and has always, quietly, had your back. "Maureen," I said, "I need to rewrite everything, and I need to do it before I leave this hospital." I was discharged on a Friday. Fern drove me home. I spent the weekend resting as instructed, with my hip in the particular sulky ache of healing, and Oliver, my cat, named by my grandson Callum during a visit 3 years ago, the one reliable male in my life, installed himself on my lap and refused to move. The following Wednesday, I was in Maureen's office. I wore Gordon's favorite color on me, a deep teal cardigan he'd always said made me look like myself. It seemed important to look like myself. Maureen had everything prepared. She'd been ready for this call. She said gently that it hadn't been entirely unexpected. The new will was straightforward in its mechanics and specific in its intentions. To Callum, a trust of $115,000 for post-secondary education and establishment costs, managed by Maureen as sole trustee until he was 25. His parents would have no access to it and no administrative authority over it. The money was his and only his. To Fern, $65,000 with the note and the accompanying letter that I wanted attached for 12 years of showing up, for the casseroles and the snow clearing and the hospital chair, for knowing that some people stay. To the Oakville Food Bank, $40,000. To the children's literacy program at the public library where I'd volunteered the previous spring, $25,000. To the cardiac care unit at the hospital where Gordon had died, $50,000. Designated for the nursing staff comfort fund. To my son and daughter-in-law, nothing. Maureen also arranged, on her recommendation, a formal cognitive assessment with a geriatric specialist. I took it that afternoon in a quiet office on the 3rd floor of a medical building on Trafalgar Road. It took 90 minutes. The specialist, a calm woman with a precise manner, told me when it was done that she would document the results and that I was, and I want to be exact here because I think precision matters, performing in the top percentile for my age group across every evaluated domain. We attached the letter to the will. My son called on a Thursday, 11 days after my fall. "Mom!" The voice was dialed up, that particular warmth that arrives only when someone needs something from you. "I just saw all these missed calls. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "What happened?" "I fractured my hip," I said. "Emergency surgery. I was in the hospital for 4 days." Silence. Then, "We were in Whistler. The service up there is terrible. I swear we were basically off the grid. You posted on Instagram 14 times." A longer silence. "That's... My wife handles the social media. You were in every photograph." He shifted approaches smoothly. "I'm coming out. I'll book a flight. This is exactly the kind of thing." "Come Saturday," I said. "Bring your wife. Don't bring excuses." They arrived Saturday just before noon, without Callum. He had hockey, my daughter-in-law explained at the door, giving me a hug that was correctly calibrated to look warm without committing to warmth. They stayed for an hour. My daughter-in-law complimented the townhouse 3 times, with the specific interest of a person calculating square footage. She asked how the recovery was going with the attentiveness of someone ticking a box. My son asked whether I'd thought any more about my long-term living situation, phrased that way, long-term living situation, and whether Maureen had updated any of the estate documents recently, given what had happened. "She has," I said. "We're meeting next Wednesday, 2 o'clock at her office. You should come." My daughter-in-law's eyes went to my son. A quick look, a fast realignment. "Of course," she said, before he could answer. "Whatever you need." They left at 1:05. Before their car had cleared the visitor parking, I could see her phone lit up in her hand. Fern came with me to Maureen's office on Wednesday. My son and daughter-in-law arrived 3 minutes early in a rental car, both of them dressed with the careful ambition of people expecting good news. He wore a gray blazer. She wore a dark plum-wrapped dress and pearl earrings, which was, for a Wednesday afternoon estate meeting in Oakville, a notable choice. They saw Fern and stopped. "Why is she here?" My daughter-in-law's voice had an edge that she hadn't quite sharpened into a weapon yet. "I invited her," I said. "Sit down. This is a private family. Fern is family, more so recently than most people with legal ties to me. Sit down." They sat. Maureen gave it a beat and then opened the file. I spoke before she could. I decided that some things needed to be said in my own words, not in the language of legal documents. I know about the calls, I said. My son looked at me steadily. What calls? Your wife called Sylvie Marchand in September. She called George Pietraszak. She asked both of them, separately, weeks apart, whether I seemed confused, forgetful, whether I was managing on my own, whether I'd had any recent falls. My daughter-in-law's composure went glassy. I was concerned about you. You live alone. You are documenting. I reached into my bag and put the Sunrise Meadows envelope on Maureen's mahogany table. You filled out an intake form for a memory care facility. You checked every box for cognitive decline, falls history, inability to manage independently. You put your name as the family contact and you included information about my home and my finances. I slid it across the table toward my son. That's your wife's handwriting, I said. That's her phone number. The postmark is October 14th, 3 weeks before I fell. My son picked it up, read it, put it down, looked at his wife. Something happened in his face that I'll spend a long time thinking about. A reorganization, a slow recalculation. It was just research, my daughter-in-law said, her voice going higher and tighter. Responsible planning. You're almost 70. You live alone. These things need to be thought about in advance. You checked the box for cognitive decline, I said. I do not have cognitive decline. I scored in the top percentile on a formal assessment administered by a geriatric specialist 9 days ago. I looked at her steadily. You were building a case. And when I fell, you didn't come. The hospital called 39 times. 39 calls. You were in Whistler posting about freedom from obligation. We didn't get the calls. You had cell service. You were on Instagram. You tagged your location in 3 separate posts. I stopped. Let that settle. I was on a concrete step in November for 20 minutes before my neighbor found me. I was in surgery for 3 hours. The person in the chair beside my bed when I came out of anesthesia was Fern. The person who organized my discharge and drove me home was Fern. The people who told me the truth about your phone calls were my neighbors and my friends. I paused. Not my son. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get when something has been said that can't be unsaid. Maureen, I said, please go ahead. Maureen read the will. Clear, calm, in the professional voice she'd refined over 30 years of doing exactly this. My son's face went through several stages as the bequests landed. Calculation, recalibration, the dawning understanding of what was not coming. Fern's hand found mine under the edge of the table. When Maureen finished, my daughter-in-law said, we'll contest this. She's obviously been manipulated. Her chin went toward Fern. By her! Mrs. Thornton underwent a comprehensive cognitive assessment on November 21st, Maureen said, her voice unchanged. Administered by Dr. Anita Bhargava, certified geriatric specialist, the results of which are witnessed, notarized, and attached to this document. If you contest, you will do so against a woman who has been formally assessed as cognitively excellent by a specialist you did not choose, documented before any of us entered this room. You are welcome to try. Estate litigation in Ontario is expensive and slow, and the threshold for overturning a properly executed will is very high. She closed the file. My son stood up. He looked older than he had an hour ago. You're going to regret this, he said. When you actually need help. I needed help on November 4th, I said. I was on a front step in the cold with a broken hip. Mr. Arsenault from across the street found me. Fern drove 40 minutes and sat in a hospital chair for 4 days. I looked at my son, at the stranger in the gray blazer who had my husband's jaw and my mother's eyes and had become, somewhere in the last 4 years, a person I didn't quite know. So when you tell me I'll be alone when I need help, I think you mean you'll be absent. And I've already lived that. I just finally decided to stop pretending it was something other than what it was. They left. The door closed. Fern exhaled slowly. Maureen poured us each a small glass of water, which was the most Maureen thing she could have done, and we sat for a moment in the quiet of a finished thing. The weeks after that were not easy. I won't say otherwise. There are mornings when you wake up and the first thing you do, before you're fully conscious, is think of calling your son. Not the son who stood in that office, but the son you raised, the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives and had to be carried inside. That boy is real. The grief for him is real, even when you know the man he became made the choices he made and you cannot pretend otherwise. I sold the townhouse in February. The market was good. I found a smaller apartment in downtown Oakville, close to the waterfront, close to Sylvie, close to the food bank and the library. There's a balcony where Oliver sits in the mornings and watches the lake. There's enough room for exactly the life I want, which turns out to be a more specific and satisfying life than I'd been living in a house sized for something I'd been telling myself I still had. Moving day, Fern was there. George Pietraszak brought his truck. Sylvie brought pierogies, which she'd learned to make specifically because Fern once mentioned at my kitchen table that they were comfort food. And Sylvie files that kind of information away and uses it at the right moment. I donated Gordon's workshop tools to the men's shed program at the community center. I kept his armchair. I kept his reading lamp. I kept the photograph from our trip to Nova Scotia in 2003, the one where we're both windburned and squinting into the Atlantic and laughing at something the photographer said. That photograph sits on my kitchen windowsill in the new apartment, which means the first thing I see every morning is both of us still laughing. In March, something happened that I hadn't expected. A Saturday afternoon, a knock at my apartment door. I opened it, and my heart did something complicated. Callum, standing in the hallway in his hockey jersey, hair still damp from the rink, with a backpack on and a look on his face that was very careful and very 9 years old. Fern was behind him, with the expression of someone who has decided to take an action and is calm about the consequences. "Hi, Grandma," Callum said. "Fern said it was okay if I came to see your new place." I stepped back from the door. "Of course it is," I said. "Come in." We spent the afternoon eating grilled cheese sandwiches, Callum's specification, and playing cards at the kitchen table. He told me about his hockey team and his teacher and the book he was reading for school and the bone he was trying to learn on his skateboard. He sat across from me with Gordon's serious eyes and told me things with the straightforward urgency of a child who is telling someone things because he wants to, not because he's been managed into it. Before he left, he pulled something from his backpack. A piece of paper, folded 4 times. "I made this when you were in the hospital," he said. "I didn't know if Mom remembered to give it to you." I unfolded it. A drawing, pencil crayon on construction paper, the kind of picture a 9-year-old makes when he's trying hard. 2 figures at a table playing cards. One tall, one small. A cat on the windowsill. Underneath, in careful printing, "I hope your hip gets better. I love you, Grandma." From Callum, I put it on the refrigerator before he was out the door. Right at the center, at eye level, held up by a magnet from Niagara Falls that Gordon and I had bought on our honeymoon and kept through 4 houses and 41 years, because some things you just don't throw away. It's April now. My hip is good. Not perfect. There are days when the cold still finds it, but good. I walk every morning along the waterfront, which is better than the old route through the subdivision, if I'm honest. Oliver comes to the window to watch me leave. He's always there when I get home, which is the right amount of judgment and constancy for a cat to provide. Callum is visited 4 times. Fern handles the logistics. I don't ask the questions that aren't mine to ask. I'm enrolled in a spring watercolor workshop through the Arts Center, 6 Thursdays starting in 2 weeks. I signed up for a group at the library for people navigating family estrangement. I wasn't sure I would have anything to offer, and I have found that I have more than I thought, and so does everyone else in the room. I'm planning a trip to Cape Breton in August. Gordon and I talked about it for years and never got there. I booked a room at a small inn near the Cabot Trail, 5 nights, and a confirmation is on my phone, and I look at it regularly. It makes me feel things I don't entirely have words for, a specific mixture of grief and stubbornness and something that might be described as forward momentum. Someone asked me recently whether I regret it. The will, cutting my son out, all of it. The honest answer is layered, and I think it's worth being honest about the layers. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret putting Callum's future in a place his parents can't reach. I don't regret giving Fern something that might look, from the outside, like money, but that I meant is something closer to what she'd actually given me, the equivalent of a hospital chair and 40 minutes on the highway in November and 12 years of showing up without being asked. But I grieve my son, not the man who stood in that office in a gray blazer and told me I'd be alone. I grieve the person I believed he was still in the process of becoming, right up until I couldn't anymore. That grief is specific, and it sits in a specific place, and it doesn't go away just because you made the correct decision. My pastor here, I joined a church in January, mostly for the Tuesday potlucks if I'm being honest, though Pastor Dennis has turned out to be exactly the kind of person who says the right thing without saying too much. He told me, Beverly, you're not mourning your son. You're releasing the version of him you were maintaining for both of you. He was right, in the way that people are right when they say the thing you already knew but needed to hear out loud. My son showed me who he was. The August phone call about property values. The September campaign to document my decline. The October form. The November silence while I was in surgery. These weren't aberrations. These were information. I believed him. Finally. Here's what I know now. At 67, in a small apartment above the waterfront in Oakville, with a cat on the windowsill and a child's drawing on the refrigerator and a plane ticket to Cape Breton in August. Family is not whoever shares your last name and appears in your legal documents. Family is whoever's in the hospital chair at 3 in the morning. Family is whoever drives 40 minutes in November without being asked. Family is whoever tells you the truth about the phone calls even though it would be easier not to. I spent 41 years being the person people could count on. I was the neighbor with the casserole and the nurse with the extra hour and the mother who made excuses and the widow who kept the door open. I gave steadily and consistently and without keeping score, and when I finally hit the concrete step on a November morning and needed someone to come, the people I'd given the most to were posting powder snow photographs from British Columbia. And the people I'd given to without calculation, Fern with her grandmother's pierogies, George with his truck, Sylvie with her honesty, Mr. Arsenault with his timing. They came, without being asked, without fanfare, without any expectation of return. If you're hearing this and you recognize something in it, the long pattern of absence dressed up as busyness, the phone calls you always make first, the holidays that keep shrinking, the family that asks about property values instead of asking how you are, I want to say this to you plainly. It's not too late. It's not too late to see it clearly. It's not too late to change the document, redirect the resources, open the door to the people who are actually standing on the other side of it. You taught people how to treat you. You can teach them differently. And if they won't learn, you can stop teaching them entirely and spend your energy on the people who already know. I'm 67. I have Oliver and a waterfront and Fern coming for dinner on Sunday and Callum visiting in 2 weeks and a trip to Cape Breton in August that I have wanted to take for 20 years. I am, for the first time in a long time, looking forward to the morning. There's something you need in here. Again, staying trust me. Again, staying trust me. Something I keep coming back to in the mornings when I'm walking along the waterfront and the lake is flat and gray and the city is still waking up. What we do, consistently and without fanfare, determines what comes back to us. Not in any mystical sense. I don't mean the universe is keeping a ledger. I mean it in the plainest, most practical way. The choices we make shape the people around us, and eventually, those people are the ones in the room when it matters. I stayed late at the food bank. I showed up to Sylvie's exhibition at the library when nobody else from the neighborhood came. I helped Fern with her mother's estate paperwork 3 years ago, a Saturday afternoon, because she asked and I had nothing more important to do. I didn't do any of those things expecting a return. I did them because they were in front of me and I was capable. That's all. And when I was on a concrete step in November with a broken hip and a phone I could barely reach, those were exactly the people who came. Not because they owed me anything, because that's who they'd become in relation to me, and who I'd become in relation to them. My son learned something different from me, somewhere along the way, or maybe I taught him the wrong lesson without knowing it, that I would always be there regardless of what he gave back, that my presence was unconditional in a way that made his absence cost nothing. I kept the door open. I made the excuses. I swallowed the hurt of 2-day visits and property tax questions and Christmas video calls that lasted 22 minutes. I told myself he was busy, that this was just how adult children were, that it would change. It didn't change because I never asked it to. I kept teaching him that I was available and that availability had no limits and no consequences. The intake form from Sunrise Meadows changed that. Not because it made me angry, though it did, but because it made things legible in a way I could no longer look away from. This wasn't drift. This was a plan, and the plan only worked if I stayed the version of myself I'd been for 4 years, passive, forgiving, available, unwilling to believe what I was seeing. I wasn't willing anymore. What I did with Maureen wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, at least to myself. Redirecting my estate toward Callum's future, toward Fern, toward the food bank, toward the cardiac unit where Gordon died. Those weren't punishments. They were accurate. They reflected finally the actual shape of my life, who was in it and who had chosen to be somewhere else. The intelligence in that is not cleverness. It's just honesty, applied to paperwork. The courage in it is not dramatic. It's just being willing to see clearly and act on what you see, even when what you see is painful and the action costs you something you've been hoping to keep. And the endurance in it, the part that's still ongoing, the part where I walk past the spot every morning and don't call the number I still have memorized, that's not cold. It's just the decision to stop spending energy maintaining a version of my life that wasn't true anymore, and to spend it instead on the version that is. Callum visited 4 times this spring. He brought his skateboard the last time and showed me a trick in the parking lot, and then came inside and ate half a sleeve of crackers and told me about his teacher with the kind of specificity that children reserve for people they trust. That's not nothing. That's, in fact, everything. I have Fern coming for dinner on Sunday. I have Kate Breton in August. I have Oliver on the windowsill and Gordon's photograph on the kitchen sill and a watercolor class starting in 2 weeks. I did not arrive here by accident. I arrived here by finally deciding that what I'd built over 67 years, the care, the showing up, the staying late, deserved to be directed somewhere it would actually land. That's not a small thing. It took me longer than it should have to understand it. But I understand it now.